There's a shadow hiding in the corner of your mind right now. It's been there your entire life, orchestrating decisions you think you're making consciously, sabotaging dreams you swear you want to achieve, and keeping you trapped in patterns you can't quite explain. Carl Jung called this the shadow, and most people spend their entire existence completely unaware that it's running the show. You see yourself as the rational decision maker, the conscious adult who weighs options and chooses wisely. But Jung understood something that modern psychology is only beginning to catch up with. The person you think you are is just the tip of the iceberg. Beneath the surface lies a vast unconscious realm filled with everything you've rejected, denied, or refused to acknowledge about yourself. This isn't some abstract psychological theory. This is the hidden operating system that's been determining your relationships, your career choices, your self-destructive habits, and your inexplicable resistance to the very things you claim to want most. The shadow doesn't just influence your behavior, it controls it in ways so subtle and sophisticated that you mistake its voice for your own authentic desires. Most people live their entire lives as prisoners of their own unconscious, convinced they're free while being pulled by invisible strings. They wonder why they keep attracting the same toxic relationships, why they sabotage themselves just as success seems within reach, why they feel inexplicably drawn to situations that hurt them, or why they resist the very changes they know would improve their lives. Jung discovered that these aren't character flaws or moral failings. They're the predictable result of disowning parts of yourself that don't fit your idealized self-image. Every quality you've rejected, every impulse you've suppressed, every aspect of human nature you've deemed unacceptable gets banished to the shadow realm. But here's what Jung understood that most people never realize. What you resist persists, and what you deny controls you. The shadow doesn't disappear when you ignore it. It becomes more powerful, more cunning, and more destructive. It finds ways to express itself through the back door of your consciousness, showing up as projection, where you see in others the very qualities you refuse to acknowledge in yourself. It manifests as self-sabotage, where you unconsciously undermine your own success. It appears as compulsive attraction to people and situations that mirror your disowned aspects. Think about the last time you had an intense emotional reaction to someone, the person who irritated you beyond reason, who you found yourself obsessing over, criticizing, or feeling inexplicably drawn to despite red flags. Jung would tell you that this person was reflecting back an aspect of your own shadow. The qualities that disturb you most in others are often the very qualities you've banished from your own self-awareness. This is why personal growth feels so difficult. You're not just trying to develop new habits or change your mindset. You're unconsciously fighting against parts of yourself that you don't even know exist. You're trying to move forward while being pulled backward by invisible forces that feel foreign but are actually the most rejected aspects of your own psyche. The shadow contains not just your so-called negative qualities, but also your disowned power, creativity, and potential. Many people have banished their own strength, their capacity for healthy anger, their sexual energy, their ambitious drive, or their creative impulses because these qualities didn't fit their family's expectations or society's conditioning. They spend their lives feeling powerless, uninspired, or blocked, never realizing they've locked away the very qualities they need to thrive. Jung understood that the goal isn't to eliminate the shadow, but to integrate it. This process, which he called individuation, involves making the unconscious conscious, acknowledging the rejected aspects of yourself, and learning to work with, rather than against, your complete psychological makeup. It's about becoming whole rather than remaining fragmented. This integration doesn't mean acting on every impulse or embracing destructive behaviors. It means recognizing that you contain the full spectrum of human potential, both light and dark, and learning to channel these energies constructively rather than having them leak out destructively through the back door of your consciousness. The person who refuses to acknowledge their capacity for selfishness often becomes manipulative in subtle ways. The individual who denies their aggressive impulses may find themselves in relationships with overtly aggressive partners. The one who rejects their sexual nature might become obsessed with others' sexuality or find themselves in situations where sexuality becomes problematic. But when you begin to acknowledge these aspects consciously, something remarkable happens. The compulsive quality disappears, the projections fade, the self-sabotage diminishes. You stop being unconsciously driven by forces you don't understand and start making genuinely conscious choices. Jung observed that most people would rather remain unconscious than face the uncomfortable truth about their complete nature. It's easier to maintain the illusion of being purely good, rational, and well-intentioned than to acknowledge the darker, more complex reality of human psychology. But this willful unconsciousness comes at an enormous cost, a life lived in reaction rather than authentic choice. The shadow doesn't just operate individually. Jung recognized that entire cultures and societies have collective shadows, aspects of human nature that get denied and projected onto other groups. The qualities a society considers unacceptable don't disappear. They get projected onto outsiders, creating the psychological foundation for prejudice, scapegoating, and conflict. Understanding your personal shadow becomes an act of both individual healing and social responsibility. When you stop projecting your disowned aspects onto others, you stop contributing to the collective unconsciousness that fuels division and conflict. When you take responsibility for your complete psychological makeup, you become genuinely free to choose your responses rather than being driven by unconscious compulsions. The process of shadow integration isn't comfortable. It requires what Jung called holding the tension of opposites, the ability to acknowledge that you contain seemingly contradictory qualities. You might be both generous and selfish, loving and hateful, creative and destructive, strong and vulnerable. Most people can't tolerate this psychological complexity, so they split themselves into acceptable and unacceptable parts, creating the very fragmentation that leads to self-sabotage. But Jung discovered that this tension is actually creative. When you can hold the opposites within yourself without needing to resolve them prematurely, something new emerges. A third way that transcends the either-or thinking that keeps most people trapped in repetitive patterns. This is what he called the transcendent function, the psyche's natural ability to create new solutions when conscious and unconscious contents are held in creative tension. The shadow work begins with honest self-observation. Notice when you have strong emotional reactions to others. Pay attention to the qualities you find most disturbing or attractive in other people. Observe the patterns in your relationships and life circumstances. These aren't random events, they're precise mirrors reflecting aspects of your own psyche that you haven't fully acknowledged. Jung emphasized that this work can't be done purely intellectually. The shadow reveals itself through lived experience, through the concrete situations and relationships that trigger your strongest reactions. It's in these moments of emotional intensity that the unconscious material becomes accessible to consciousness. Dreams were another crucial avenue Jung used for shadow integration. The figures that appear in your dreams often represent disowned aspects of yourself. The criminals, enemies, or disturbing characters that populate your nighttime psyche aren't foreign invaders. They're parts of your own psychological makeup seeking recognition and integration. Active imagination, Jung's technique of engaging consciously with unconscious material, provides another pathway for shadow work. By dialoguing with the rejected aspects of yourself, by giving them voice and listening to what they have to say, you begin to understand their function and find constructive ways to honor their energy. This isn't about becoming self-indulgent or abandoning moral responsibility. It's about becoming genuinely moral rather than merely compliant. When you acknowledge your capacity for selfishness, you can choose generosity more authentically. When you recognize your aggressive impulses, you can channel that energy into healthy assertiveness or protective action. The integrated person doesn't claim to be purely good, they claim to be consciously responsible for their complete nature. They don't project their disowned qualities onto others because they've acknowledged these qualities within themselves. They don't sabotage their success because they've made peace with their own power and potential. Jung understood that this integration is a lifelong process, not a destination you reach and then maintain effortlessly. The shadow continues to evolve as you grow and change. New aspects of yourself may be revealed. New projections may need to be withdrawn. New patterns of self-sabotage may emerge as you reach new levels of success or encounter new life circumstances. But once you understand how the shadow operates, once you've tasted the freedom that comes from making the unconscious conscious, you can't go back to the naive belief that you're simply the person you think you are. You become a student of your own unconscious, curious about the hidden forces that shape your experience, committed to the ongoing work of becoming whole. This is Jung's revolutionary insight. You are not the victim of your unconscious patterns. You are not condemned to repeat the same self-defeating behaviors forever. You are not at the mercy of mysterious forces beyond your understanding. The shadow that has been sabotaging your life is not your enemy. It's your disowned power seeking integration. The very qualities you've been running from may contain exactly what you need to create the life you actually want. The anger you've suppressed might fuel the boundaries you need to establish. The selfishness you've denied might inform the self-care that's been missing from your life. The darkness you've rejected might contain the depth and authenticity that your relationships have been lacking. Jung's work with the shadow reveals that psychological wholeness isn't about perfection, it's about completion. It's about embracing the full spectrum of your humanity rather than trying to embody only the socially acceptable aspects. It's about becoming consciously responsible for your complete nature rather than being unconsciously driven by the parts you refuse to acknowledge. This integration transforms everything. Your relationships become more authentic because you're no longer projecting your disowned aspects onto others. Your creative expression flows more freely because you're not censoring parts of yourself. Your decision-making becomes clearer because you're not being unconsciously influenced by rejected aspects of your psyche. Most importantly, you stop being your own worst enemy. The self-sabotage that has mystified you begins to make sense as you recognize the rejected aspects of yourself that have been trying to get your attention through destructive means. When you finally listen to what these aspects are trying to tell you, when you find constructive ways to honor their energy, the compulsive self-defeating behaviors naturally diminish. The shadow integration process reveals that what you thought was your greatest weakness often contains your greatest strength. The very quality you've spent your life trying to hide or overcome may be exactly what the world needs from you, expressed consciously and constructively rather than leaked out unconsciously and destructively. Jung's exploration of the shadow shows us that authentic power comes not from denying our darkness, but from integrating it consciously. The person who claims to have no shadow is far more dangerous than the one who acknowledges their capacity for both creation and destruction. The individual who refuses to see their own selfishness is more likely to act selfishly than the one who consciously recognizes and takes responsibility for this aspect of their nature. This is why shadow work is both deeply personal and profoundly social. When you stop projecting your disowned qualities onto others, you stop contributing to the collective unconsciousness that creates division and conflict. When you take responsibility for your complete psychological makeup, you become part of the solution rather than part of the problem. The hidden self-sabotage pattern Jung identified isn't just about individual psychology. It's about the human tendency to split reality into acceptable and unacceptable parts, creating the very fragmentation that leads to suffering on both personal and collective levels. Now let's explore how these shadow patterns play out in the most intimate areas of your life, because understanding is only the beginning. Integration requires you to see how your unconscious programming actually operates in real time, especially in the spaces where you're most vulnerable. The shadow doesn't just influence your career choices or your relationship with success. It infiltrates every conversation you have, every boundary you set or fail to set, every moment of attraction or repulsion you feel toward another person. Jung understood that relationships serve as the most powerful mirrors for our unconscious content, reflecting back to us exactly what we're trying to avoid seeing about ourselves. Think about the last time someone really got under your skin, when their behavior triggered an intense emotional reaction that seemed disproportionate to the actual situation. That person wasn't just annoying you, they were activating a shadow aspect within yourself. The qualities that disturb us most in others are often the very qualities we've disowned in ourselves. The person who irritates you with their neediness might be reflecting your own unacknowledged dependency. The individual whose arrogance makes your blood boil could be mirroring your own disowned grandiosity. This is where Jung's concept of projection becomes devastatingly practical. We don't see people as they are, we see them as we are. More specifically, we see them through the lens of our own unconscious material. The parts of others that we find most compelling or most repulsive are usually the parts of ourselves that we've either idealized or demonized. Consider your romantic relationships. Jung observed that we tend to fall in love with people who carry the qualities we've split off from ourselves. If you've disowned your own power, you'll be magnetically drawn to powerful people. If you've rejected your own vulnerability, you'll find yourself attracted to those who embody the sensitivity you've buried. This isn't conscious choice, it's unconscious completion. You're trying to become whole through another person, which is why so many relationships become intense, complicated, and ultimately disappointing when the projection inevitably collapses. The shadow also determines what Jung called your unlived life, the paths you didn't take, the dreams you abandoned, the aspects of yourself you never developed. These unlived possibilities don't disappear. They remain active in your unconscious, often creating a sense of regret, resentment, or inexplicable longing. You might find yourself bitter about other people's success in areas you secretly wished you had pursued. You might feel drawn to people who represent the life you didn't choose, or you might sabotage opportunities that would require you to embrace aspects of yourself you've kept hidden. Your shadow also shows up in your relationship with authority. The way you respond to bosses, teachers, parents, or anyone in a position of power reflects your own disowned relationship with authority. If you automatically rebel against all authority figures, you might be projecting your own disowned need for structure and guidance. If you compulsively seek approval from authority figures, you could be avoiding your own inner authority and leadership capacity. Even your relationship with money, success, and material possessions is deeply influenced by shadow dynamics. Jung noticed that people often have unconscious conflicts about wealth and achievement that sabotage their conscious goals. You might consciously want financial security while unconsciously believing that money is corrupting or that success makes you a sellout. These internal contradictions create a constant state of self-sabotage where you simultaneously move toward and away from what you say you want. The shadow also manifests in your creative expression or lack thereof. The parts of yourself that you've deemed unacceptable often contain tremendous creative energy. Your anger might hold the fire needed for passionate art. Your sadness might contain the depth required for meaningful writing. Your wildness might be the source of innovative thinking. When you repress these qualities, you don't just lose access to their negative expressions, you lose access to their creative potential as well. Jung emphasized that shadow work isn't about eliminating these unconscious patterns. It's about developing a conscious relationship with them. Instead of trying to resolve the contradictions within yourself, you learn to contain them consciously. You acknowledge both your generosity and your selfishness, your strength and your weakness, your love and your hatred. This conscious holding transforms the energy that was previously trapped in unconscious patterns. When you can admit to your own capacity for cruelty, you become genuinely compassionate rather than just nice. When you can acknowledge your own selfishness, you become authentically generous rather than compulsively giving. When you can own your own darkness, you can access your genuine light. The process requires what Jung called active imagination, a technique where you consciously engage with the figures and images that emerge from your unconscious. This might involve dialoguing with the parts of yourself you've rejected, imagining conversations with the people who trigger you most intensely, or exploring the symbolic content of your dreams and fantasies. Through this active engagement, you begin to integrate these split-off aspects rather than remaining unconsciously controlled by them. But perhaps the most profound aspect of shadow integration is how it transforms your relationship with other people. When you've acknowledged and integrated your own capacity for every human quality, you stop needing other people to be different than they are. You can see their behavior as information about their own unconscious patterns, rather than taking it personally. You become genuinely curious about others, rather than constantly judging or trying to fix them. This doesn't mean becoming passive or accepting harmful behavior. It means responding from consciousness rather than reacting from unconscious projection. You can set boundaries without demonizing the other person. You can disagree without making them wrong. You can protect yourself without needing to destroy them. Jung believed that this individual work of shadow integration had collective implications. When enough people take responsibility for their own unconscious projections, the level of collective conflict decreases. Wars, prejudice, and social division are often expressions of collective shadow projection, where groups of people disown certain qualities and project them onto other groups. The more individuals who reclaim their projections, the less fuel there is for collective destructiveness. The ultimate goal of shadow work isn't perfection or the elimination of negative qualities. It's wholeness, what Jung called individuation. This involves accepting and integrating all aspects of yourself, both light and dark, both acceptable and unacceptable. When you achieve this integration, you become authentically powerful rather than compensatorily powerful. You become genuinely loving rather than performatively loving. You become truly creative rather than just productive. This wholeness doesn't happen overnight. It's a lifelong process that requires constant vigilance, ongoing self-examination, and the courage to face uncomfortable truths about yourself. But the alternative, remaining unconscious of your shadow patterns, means remaining trapped in cycles of self-sabotage that will continue to undermine your conscious goals and poison your relationships. The shadow holds the key to your authentic power, your genuine creativity, and your capacity for real intimacy. But accessing these gifts requires you to face the parts of yourself you've spent a lifetime trying to avoid. It requires you to embrace the full spectrum of your humanity, not just the parts that seem socially acceptable. When you finally do this work, when you reclaim the energy that was trapped in unconscious patterns, you discover something remarkable. The very qualities you were most afraid of in yourself often contain the seeds of your greatest gifts. Your anger might fuel your passion for justice. Your sadness might deepen your capacity for empathy. Your selfishness might teach you healthy boundaries. Your darkness might be the source of your most authentic light. This is Jung's ultimate insight about the shadow. It's not your enemy to be defeated. It's your ally to be integrated. The goal isn't to become a perfect person. It's to become a whole person. Now we arrive at the most challenging truth of all. The shadow doesn't just operate in isolation. It creates what Jung called a conspiracy of unconsciousness, where entire societies, organizations, and relationships become infected by collective denial. You've been participating in this conspiracy your entire life without realizing it. Think about the groups you belong to, the communities you're part of, the organizations you work for. Each one has its own shadow, its own collection of disowned qualities that everyone agrees not to see. The corporate culture that prides itself on innovation while systematically crushing creativity. The spiritual community that preaches love while harboring deep judgments. The family system that values harmony while enabling dysfunction. You don't just carry your personal shadow, you carry the shadow of every group you've ever belonged to. Their unprocessed darkness becomes your unprocessed darkness. Their collective blind spots become your blind spots. Their shared delusions become the water you swim in, so familiar you can't even see it. This is why individual shadow work, while necessary, isn't sufficient. You can spend years in therapy, decades in meditation, lifetimes in self-reflection, but if you return to the same unconscious systems, you'll be pulled back into the same patterns. The collective shadow has a gravitational pull that's almost impossible to resist alone. Jung understood that true individuation requires not just personal integration, but what he called the transcendent function, the ability to hold the tension between opposing forces without choosing sides. This means learning to see the collective shadow without being consumed by it, participating in groups while maintaining your individual consciousness, belonging without losing yourself. The political polarization you see around you is collective shadow projection on a massive scale. Each side has disowned certain qualities and projected them onto the other. The left disowns its capacity for authoritarianism and sees it only in the right. The right disowns its capacity for weakness and sees it only in the left. Both are partially correct and completely blind to their own darkness. This pattern repeats at every level of human organization. Companies project their greed onto competitors while maintaining an image of social responsibility. Nations project their violence onto enemies while claiming moral superiority. Religions project their intolerance onto other faiths while preaching universal love. You participate in this collective shadow dance every time you align yourself completely with one group against another. Every time you see the problem as existing entirely outside yourself. Every time you believe that if only those other people would change, everything would be fine. The antidote to collective shadow possession is what Jung called holding the tension of the opposites. Instead of choosing sides, you learn to see the shadow in every position, including your own. Instead of joining the mob, you maintain your individual capacity for discernment. Instead of projecting all darkness onto the other, you recognize the darkness you share with every human being. This doesn't mean becoming neutral or passive. It means acting from a place of integrated consciousness rather than unconscious reactivity. It means being able to oppose what you believe is wrong without demonizing those who embody it. It means fighting for what you believe in while remaining humble about your own limitations and blind spots. The most profound shadow work happens not in isolation, but in relationship, not in perfect communities, but in the messy reality of human interaction. Every conflict becomes an opportunity to reclaim a projection. Every trigger becomes a chance to integrate a disowned part. Every enemy becomes a teacher, showing you aspects of yourself you haven't yet accepted. This is the ultimate gift of shadow work. It transforms you from someone who fights against the darkness in the world to someone who works with the darkness in themselves. You stop trying to eliminate evil and start learning to integrate it consciously. You stop dividing the world into good and bad people and start recognizing the good and bad in every person, including yourself. When enough individuals do this work, collective consciousness begins to shift, not through force or persuasion, but through the quiet revolution of people who refuse to participate in unconscious projection, who meet hatred with curiosity, meet judgment with compassion, meet fear with courage. Jung believed that the future of humanity depends on individuals brave enough to face their own darkness and integrate it consciously. Not perfect people, but whole people. Not saints, but humans who have learned to dance with their demons rather than being possessed by them. This is your invitation to step out of the conspiracy of unconsciousness and into the difficult, beautiful work of becoming whole. To stop looking for someone to blame and start looking for something to integrate. To stop trying to fix the world and start healing the part of the world that lives within you. The shadow you've been running from your entire life isn't your enemy. It's your teacher, your guide, your key to authentic power and genuine love. The moment you stop fighting it and start dancing with it, everything changes. Not just for you, but for everyone whose life you touch. This is how personal transformation becomes social transformation. This is how individual healing becomes collective healing. This is how the darkness you feared becomes the light you've been seeking all along.